Well, hello there again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of What Do You Believe? I am Devin Croner, your host, and I am excited to have you with me on this journey. Through this series, what we've been endeavoring to do is just talk with people and get perspectives about insights, passions, hobbies, things of interest, maybe things that the general population wouldn't understand as much, whether it's a political viewpoint, a religious one, some sort of interesting job, or some sort of life experience that maybe not everybody would have. And tonight, I am excited to bring you another one of these interviews as we are going to be talking with a really incredible woman who has a lot of experience with kids. She has been a daycare director, and involved in management of people, but also dealing with families and children. But what I'm excited to talk to her about is something that is not something that my wife and I have experienced, but is near and dear to my heart, and that is foster care and adoption to a degree, but really foster care. So when my wife and I were younger, not that we're old, but when we were younger, before we had any children of our own, we actually had started the process of getting ready to foster kids in the community that we were in. We took several classes. In fact, we had taken all the classes, and we were getting ready for our home study when we found out that we were pregnant with our firstborn child. And so we actually put the process on hold at that time, and ended up moving shortly thereafter. But we put the process on hold because we had decided that we didn't want to bring a new baby into a situation where we were also, trying to bring in a child through the foster care system that was going to have a lot of things going on in their life. There are kids who come into foster care that are obviously traumatized and things have happened, but they don't necessarily have medical needs, special needs of that nature. They would be considered what you would just, a normal kid, just in a bad situation, all the way to the other end of the spectrum of kids who come into the system whose parents are, in the hospital giving birth and then going to jail because of being drug addicts and sometimes, prostitution or things of that nature. There's a whole end of the spectrum. There are kids whose parents maybe just have suffered a mental or emotional break and have not been able to take care of them properly, all the way to kids whose parents have been just downright negligent and abusive. And as a pastor in children's ministry for 10 years, I saw several cases of those sorts of situations where parents were having trouble, and some were in the process, and some were not really going through the process. I also saw the other side of families that, excuse me, had fostered and were fostering and just endeavoring to help, wanting to love on kids, wanting to help families. And, there are connotations on both sides. There are people who look at, all parents who lose their children as, they must be terrible people. Otherwise, they wouldn't have lost their children. And while you can see that on the surface, that's not always the truth. Sometimes it's much more complicated than that. Again, sometimes it's a matter of circumstances or external issues that just cause something to go wrong, and somebody wasn't able to handle it. And so they need that break. They need that extra support. They need somebody else to step in and care for their child while they get their lives back together. All the way over to the other end of the spectrum there, where there are people who just honestly probably shouldn't have anything to do with child. But then they'll still fight tooth and nail to not lose custody, because there are benefits that go along with that and services that go along with that they want to try and take advantage of. On the flip side, there are people who get into foster care because they love kids. They want to be an open home, a loving place, a safe place, which is what my wife and I's intention was and is in the future when our kids are all a little bit older, to open up our home and to do that. We just want to love kids and give them a safe place that they can come during a very, very traumatic time. And we know several wonderful foster families that's what they're doing all across the board. People who take in special needs kids, kids that really have a lot of issues, physical issues, health issues, emotional issues, all the way to, we're just open to taking in kids. And then there are, the bad apples that I've seen and experienced, and the stories that are out there of people that get into it for the wrong reason. I think one of the things that's hardest for me as a pastor, and I've always kind of tried to caution people against, is getting into foster care specifically for the purpose of adopting, because that does happen. And we know, again, some wonderful families that have been created because a loving family took in a child, and through the process, the parents were not able, or parent was not able to do what was needed to get the child back. And the foster family, having them over a period of time and just loving them and getting to know them, um, decided that, hey, we want this child to be a part of our family, and they went ahead and adopted. Um, and that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's a beautiful way to go. Uh, for some folks, and for some people sometimes who maybe can't have kids on their own. But I've always cautioned people in ministry that get into foster care, you have to be careful, because you can never say that it's a guarantee that that's going to be the case, that you're going to be able to end up adopting that child. And I've seen that happen too, where families have fostered and they've had a child, and the child has been in their home for just a long time. Sometimes their entire life. They can be, 3, 4 years old, and they've been in this foster family's care. They're the only parents that child has ever known. And the biological parent keeps kind of going through the process, and then they'll have a relapse or take a step back or just stop doing what they need to do and then come back and do it again. And they reach the point where, they think the foster family thinks, hey, this is going to be our child. And then at the last minute, something changes, something happens. And man, it's crushing. It's crushing for the child, who oftentimes doesn't understand. It's crushing for the foster family, who has just poured their heart and their soul into loving and caring for this child, and the extended family, sometimes church family, community. And it can make people very, very angry and bitter. But again, the flip side of that is that, the way the system is designed, and I'm not saying the system is perfect, but the way the system is designed is to try and give biological parents the benefit of the doubt and the ability to do the things that they need to do to get everything straightened out so that they can get their life on track and get their kids back. And depending on the issue, depending on the situation, sometimes that can happen quickly. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes parents don't start off wanting to go through that process. Whatever the situation, though, is, it's always important uh, to remember that there are kids involved, even if they are a little bit older. Kids who need support, they need love, they need trust, they need people to believe in them. All kids, even kids that aren't in foster care. I mean, my kids need people, my wife and I, obviously, to encourage them and support them and believe in them. But they need other people in their lives, church leaders, teachers, Sunday school directors, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, other people that are going to encourage them and kind of help model that. Kids are sponges. I know you probably know that, but kids are just sponges and they absorb knowledge and information and traits and characteristics and habits and patterns, and they learn how to process and they learn how to deal with things. And again, sometimes parents are the primary, but they're not always the best model for teaching kids, and that's why it's important to have that community, even if you are doing the very best you can as a parent. It's important to have that community because there are going to be areas where you're weak. Um, and all of that to say, my heart has always been for children as an adult. I did not start off in ministry wanting to do children's ministry. I actually actively resisted it. But after spending 10 years as a children's pastor in ministry, and then becoming a father myself, absolutely, I love kids and their innocence and their sweetness, and love the fact that we get to make that impression. And I always want to be careful, and I always want to encourage people to be careful. That's why it's important for people to, be careful of how they talk. What it is you watch, what it is you have on your phone, what it is you're looking at, all those things, because kids are going to pick up on that. I saw a great meme the other day. It was a comic strip meme about the way that anger filters through a family. And it was, a guy at work just being hammered and pounded on by his boss. I don't know if he'd done something wrong or the boss just didn't like him or what it was, but I mean, just berating him and beating him down. And of course, he's standing there taking it. And then the next part of the strip is he's at home and he's just berating his wife, taking that out on her, that anger and that pent up frustration out on her. And then the next part of the strip is the wife taking out that anger and that frustration on the child, and berating the kid. Probably, did something silly like spilling milk or didn't clean up a toilet, whatever it was. And then the next part of the strip was that child, just angrily berating some other little kid, or some other kid. I guess I don't know how old they were. And then the end of the strip was that kid who got bullied, ending their life because they had been bullied. And that pattern kind of flows through. And so my heart goes out not only for kids, but to people that want to work with kids, whether that's in a daycare setting or teachers. So many amazing educators, and right now a lot of people who are educators at home, still trying to figure things out. Co-ops, librarians. Oh my gosh, I love our librarians here. Coaches, sports coaches, debate, chess club, musicians, all of those sorts of things. Children's ministry workers, nursery workers, again, people who want to work with kids and invest in kids and love kids. And then there's this special class of people. Really, I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, believe this special class of people that are just called. I mean, I don't know if you're a person of faith, if you believe in destiny and plans and purposes and all that, but just really with everything in me, people who are called to step into situations and say, I'm going to be there in those moments when the natural biological parents can't. I'm going to love these kids. I'm going to love this child. I'm going to care for them. I'm going to take care of them. It's amazing. It really is amazing. And so with that, I am excited to bring our guest in here. Where is she? There we go. They updated the settings here. I had to change it. There she is. Miss Melissa, can you hear me?
How are you? Hello.
I'm fantastic. Good to see you. And thank you so much for taking the time to join me in this interview process series that I'm doing. I really just appreciate you giving us the time and your insight. Thank you so much. Thank
No
you.
worries.
So first of all, before we get into discussion here, tell us a little bit about you, your background. I know you, of course, but for those that are going to be watching, just tell us a little about who you are, where you're from, what you do, that sort of bio stuff, if you will.
My name's Melissa. I currently live in Dearborn Heights, Michigan. I was born and raised in Hummel, Michigan. I went to school at Western Kentucky University, where I earned my bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary early childhood education. I have worked in preschools and daycares and kindergarten class. On top of that, I'm also an active foster mom. I have two amazing boys that we have brought into our family in forms of guardianship from the foster care system. And then occasionally we have a bonus little one.
So cool. And that's where we're going to get to here in just a moment. But I don't want to neglect to talk about the daycare side of it, because there's real opportunity to love on kids and whatnot in the daycare setting too. Talk a little bit about that. What drew you into that kind of a career field, and what is that like for people who maybe don't know and understand? They think it's just babysitting.
Oh, it's so much more than babysitting. I got involved with early education so often. We know that 95% of a child's education is formed by the age of 5. That's what we start with. As we start and we look at the foundation of education, I want to be a part of that. There are amazing elementary school teachers, high school teachers, college teachers out there, but so often, up until the past couple of years, early education has really not been at the forefront of parents' minds because it's not been talked about and it's not been learned about back in the early 2000s, back in the 1990s. Now, as we go to, every parent wants that great preschool experience for their kids because we're beginning to know that early education is the foundation. But that is why I got started. And it starts in daycares and leads to preschools. I've done both. A quality childcare has both that nurturing and that education aspect.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually went to preschool twice because I failed preschool the first time through. They told my parents I didn't play well with others, so they made me repeat the whole preschool experience. So I'm very familiar with preschool on a personal level. Just throwing that out there. Anyway, what I really want to talk about, though, is the foster care aspect. Again, this is just an incredible experience,
Yes.
ministry, incorporation, and change of your family. So, first of all, because of the educational side of it and your background and your training and experience, talk about the reasoning for foster care and the importance of foster care and why we need it. Can you give us a little bit of that foundation?
So I will give a little bit of that foundation, but I'll also give a little bit of our personal and what led us to foster care.
Yeah.
I have worked with children for over 20 years and almost over 15 when I started fostering. Parenting just wasn't in the cards for our family. Part of working in schools, I worked in amazing school districts where you were two family households, incomes that could hold their own. And then I've also worked in very rural and very where the population, I used to give kids baths before they went home because they didn't have running water. Not because it was just the demographic that I worked with. So I got to see all sorts of children, not just foster isn't for the neglect. The whole point of foster, and I say it anytime someone asks me, is the goal is not to adopt and not to keep these babies. The goal of foster is to provide a service back to their home. Just like we do at school. We provide a service and then we send them home. It just so happened that we had a situation that led our family kind of head over heels in foster care. We got a phone call throughout the family and said, hey, we've got some kiddos in our family that are in trouble, and what can we do? They were in the foster care system with an amazing foster family that we still see and talk to every month. We talk to them weekly. They've stepped in to be our aunts and uncles to our boys. but we had an opportunity to help, and that's what we did.
Mm-hmm. What is that like to kind of go through the process of saying, okay, we are going to open up our home to these kids that are coming out of a situation that maybe isn't ideal, and that's going to be very disruptive, most likely, even without other children in the home. Talk about that process, kind of what led you to make the decision, say, okay, we want to do that, we want to go forward with it.
So at the time that the boys came into our care, we did not have children in our home. I was um, full-time working. My husband was working. The only thing we had to worry about was a fish and a puppy dog. Um, if we weren't home at 8 o'clock, the world went on. If I didn't come home, my husband made his own dinner. It was one of those things that we didn't think about childcare. We didn't, even though I worked in the business, it wasn't something that I had to think about. We didn't think about, was our house child proof and child ready? It was not. It was not. We didn't have extra beds when we got the call for the boys. We had one extra bed, and then the extra room for my oldest son was an office that also held all of our Christmas decorations. So all of that stuff comes very quickly, because when you sign up to foster and you decide to be a foster parent, you go through a long range of classes, and they tell you what everything's going to be like, and they tell you, you might get a couple weeks notice, you might get a couple days notice. We had a couple hours, and all of a sudden these babies were coming in. So it very quickly changes your life, even down to things like grocery shopping. We didn't have child-friendly food. We had Greek yogurt in the fridge, and they were looking at me like, what's that? We want the strawberry kind with superheroes on the side of it. All of those things change, but also your thought processes change. It's more than just caring for two. It's caring for however many you have. Sometimes you foster an infant and you look at that from an infant standpoint. We do not foster infants. We foster children over the age of 8, just because that's where the greatest needs is. And we tend to foster boys because that is, boys have a harder time finding homes. All of a sudden, with an infant and a toddler, you have the ability to shape and sometimes change behavior. When you take adolescents and kids, my boys were 6 and 8 when they came to us. They knew what they'd been through. They knew they had a parent. They knew they had another parent, and they've been through it. So they were already very closed and very jaded. So you come in with that as well. With foster care, oftentimes you come in with services, counseling, medication, trauma, stuff like that. All of the things that, I'll be honest, we weren't ready for. It was a crash course in parenting quickly. A lot of prayer, a lot of tears, a lot of support to kind of get us through. I'd been a teacher for years, but all of a sudden we found, we fostered knowing that the boys went to an Ann Arbor school, which is about an hour away from us. We wanted to ensure that they had proper time to get settled, because we did not know what was going to happen with court. So we drove an hour back and forth every day taking them to school. So my boys would leave at 6 o'clock to get to school at 7. And then I would drive an hour back to go to work. And then my husband would leave at 2 to pick them up at 3, and they'd get back at 4. And there was a series of therapies out in their community. And we went to them versus finding services in our community for them, because that was their home.
Wow. So many things that I want to branch into that I don't know we'll have time to touch on at all. But first of all, talk about the classes again for somebody that maybe doesn't know the process. My wife and I took the classes. I actually was explaining that before you came on. We had taken the classes and then found out we were pregnant with our first, and so we stopped the process because we didn't want to bring kids in with a new infant. So I've been through the classes, but I kind of think of it's a lot like going through real estate school. I went through real estate school and then started selling houses, and nothing that I learned in real estate school helped me sell houses. And so to me, the classes are a little bit like that. So talk about the classes and the process that you have to go through to be able to foster.
So To start very simple, fostering is an amazing thing, but it's a wide open book. And kind of like when you foster, you can choose all different agencies. You have to choose an agency to foster with before you can take a class here in the state of Michigan, whether it's DHS and you take children that come from the state. We foster through a private agency. There's many foster agencies across the states and all states. I was a foster parent in Kentucky before I moved to Michigan. I was a foster parent with DHS in Kentucky. I'm a foster parent in Michigan with a private agency. Each of the classes they cover the same items, what happens, the reunification part. They're very, 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 very honest with you. The whole goal of fostering is to reunify. And we'll get into that later of what that looks like and, what happens when you don't agree with those things. It also talks about, what you may get as far as trauma, abuse. It talks about some of the resources, but not a lot of them. It talks a little bit about what you can do in a perfect world. You bring Tommy into your house and you try and make Tommy feel comfortable. That's great if Tommy's an infant, but Tommy wasn't an infant in our case. But it's amazing, amazing adventure. The classes can be it's a broad overview. It's not very, they cover a lot of topics, but until you're actually in the trenches, they oftentimes don't cover the topics like Devin said. You're selling a house and they don't tell you what happens when your child has PTSD. They don't tell you what it's like when your child comes to you with different illnesses. We had a foster who had sickle cell anemia. I remember touching about it for maybe 5 minutes in a class. But when this baby's walking into your door and, you often get a very snapshot from the foster care worker because that's all they have. And she says, little miss has sickle cell anemia. And I'm like, oh, we talked about that, but I don't know what that is. So what does that mean for them? With foster care, you do have to go through trainings. You have to uptrain as well. But oftentimes those are courses that you can choose. Some of the ones that we've chose have directly impacted us, the trauma, therapy side of things, reunification, stuff like that. You also have to be background checked. You have to take CPR and first aid. They have to come in and do countless home inspections. They talk to some of references. In my case, when we fostered the boys, I'd not been in the state of Michigan for over 5 years. So they also had to do a background check through the state of Kentucky, where I had lived before. So it's hit or miss. Every year they come and do a home check. Part of fostering is opening your door at all times. Devin, there have been times that, sometimes we have announced visits and sometimes we have not announced visits. There have been times that my doorbell has rang at 7 o'clock and I am welcoming a foster care worker in my bathrobe. There has been times that, kids have moments. You have enough of them, and that things don't always go perfect. There have been times where, we've been in full-on meltdown mode and the doorbell rings and it's like, oh, we're here for your monthly check. And you're like, that's perfect. That's great. Come on in. You're getting to see a real dose of life.
Yeah. That's life in general,
right.
with kids it's with those moments when everything's going good and you're like, man, I wish everybody would show up now.
Come
and
on
they
in.
don't.
Right.
And as they're throwing things across the room, that's when somebody's walking and they're like, oh, the pastor's kid, so I totally get that. Now, going back to something you said earlier, you said that you guys have primarily, not exclusively, primarily fostered boys because boys have a harder time finding placements. Talk about that aspect and also the age. You said that it's harder for kids that are a little older. Everybody wants to foster the babies. So tell us a little bit about that for you, and then generally, like, why that's the case.
Well, we have heard, and I don't have any hard facts, but we have heard that most children over the age of 5 will be skipped through 3 foster homes before they find a home that will take them. We've also been told in class that, if you want to foster right now, it's easier to foster older, because babies tend to have a wait list.
Mm.
Oftentimes, when you foster babies, they tend to be more permanent than when you foster maybe older kids, because they've been, with mom and dad. They've been with mom and something's happened at the moment and mom can't take care of them right now. So they may have to go back. We we happened to find, just for our home, it was easier to, our preference was to take the older kids. They sleep through the night. That was a big thing for us. They're potty trained. That was also really important for us. Now, with saying that, we have gotten calls for younger kids and we've taken them too. When we were told, when the boys went into foster care, when their situation happened, and the county got the call, they called 4 foster families before someone would take them. One, there was 2 of them. 2, they were boys. Boys in general, who are in the system, they are often stereotyped as having behavior problems. They're also stereotyped as, not the ones you can trust. They're also stereotyped as just being harder. I don't know how true that is. For us, it just made sense. There were 2 of them. They were 2 boys. Bring them on. Doesn't mean we haven't fostered girls in the past. We just happen to foster more boys than we fostered girls. We know that children above the age of 10 and 11 have a very, very, very hard time finding homes. And if I can share a story real quick, we were in court one time and there was this young girl who would come in and she was in shackles, Devin. She was in a green jumpsuit and her hands were shackled and her arms were shackled. And she got in front of the judge and the judge said, "Why is she shackled?" And the guard that was with her said, "That is our policy." And the judge said, "Has she done anything wrong?" And the guard said, "No, they couldn't find a home for her." So children who are older tend to, when they do find homes, their group homes or their detention homes, this young lady didn't have a place to go. She was going through what they call parental termination, which means that her parents could not get her back. She was getting ready to be a ward of the court. And because there wasn't enough foster care homes for teenagers, she was sent to a detention home. And it just ingrains in my mind, because at that time, she wasn't much older than my oldest.
Wow.
That could have been my boys. The toddlers are fun. I encourage people who are looking into fostering, go for the toddlers, go for the babies, because they need the love. But the older kids, the kids 5, 6, 7, those teenagers, they need a place to call home. And it was just our call. God told us to take the older ones.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, you said that the babies are fun. Not to say that they can't have some issues
Right. They definitely
and
do.
health problems. And
Yes.
if they come from a home where the parent lost them because of drugs, they can have
Right.
addiction issues. I mean, there can be serious problems.
There are.
But they don't tend to have the attitudes, things like that older ones can. I insert my story here just a little bit before we go back to you sharing. So my whole goal in fostering, when we started our process, was different. My wife wanted to get the babies because she's a baby person. And now that we've had 4, we don't want any more. But now that our oldest is not a baby anymore, she's like, no, 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 no. But my whole goal was, I specifically want to go after those teenagers that are like 17, 16, 17, that are about to age out of the system. Because I don't know how true this stat is anymore, because this was 2010-ish, and in Kansas. But we were told at that time that in the state of Kansas, which isn't even like a huge populated state, there was something like 100 teenagers that aged out of the system every day, and they go into adult life with no family.
With no
They
family.
have nobody to celebrate a birthday with them, nowhere to go on Christmas break from school, no home to go to. And I remember hearing that and I thought, my God, even if they never call me dad, I want to take them all and just be like, you will always have a place that you can call and you can come back to, because that is most of these kids are not in the system. I have seen some experiences where kids have been put into the system because they have had trouble and the parents couldn't handle it. But most of these kids are not in the system because they've done anything wrong. It's the parents who have had issues, health issues, drug issues, work issues, mental issues, whatever it is. The kids haven't done anything wrong. And yet, like what you're just describing, that girl is being treated like a criminal because of her situation, and how devaluing that must be for her, how demeaning that must be for her. It just breaks your heart to think
I
about.
sat in the courtroom and cried. And I looked, my dad and my sister were with me that day, and I said, "Can I take her home?" And they said, "You can't." And she actually was placed with a family member at the time. But there's so many stories like hers. There's so many stories of children being aged out of foster care. Some states, they now age out at the age of 21. Most states, they age out at the age of 18, depending the situation that they're in. If they're in a foster care home like we run, we're never going to turn a kiddo away. If they're in a county or a state-run institution, such as a group home, such as a detention center like this young girl was in, it's kind of 18 and out. They get a certain amount of money, they get their belongings, and they may have transitional housing if it's available,
Mm-hmm.
or they may not. In Michigan, I have been told and I have seen that there is no transitional home because the wait list is so long. Oftentimes, you were very right. Kids don't come into care because of their own selves. They come into care because of the situations that they've been in. Our story is a story of crime and drugs. We've had children in our home. We've had temporary children because their family couldn't afford heat in the wintertime. It was a few days before Christmas when the first little girl we ever fostered came to stay with us because her family couldn't afford heat. And there was no heat in the home. We've had families that have come to us because of health issues, and it's been a short stay because mom got sick and there was no one to take care of the kiddo. With our boys now, it was a situation of drugs and mental health and crime. But these boys didn't ask for that. That little girl did not ask for that. You never know what you're getting. And oftentimes when you get that phone call, and they call it an intake phone call, and they'll say, our agency that we use is Hands Across the Water. They'll say, "This is so-and-so from Hands Across the Water. We've come into care to it for a 3-year-old little boy. His name is blank. We know this is what we know about him." And it may be, we know his race, we know his weight, we know his what he may like or why he's in care. And then I've gotten phone calls that have said, "Hey, Melissa, this is so-and-so from Hands Across the Water. We have a 12-year-old African-American little girl." Well, what can you tell me about her? She's 12. That's all they can tell me about when they come in. And then sometimes placements 30 minutes, sometimes it's 4 hours. And then when they come in and knock on the door, they may have a little bit more information, but a lot of times there's not information that comes with that. You don't find information until you're kind of learning as you go. Do they have an allergy? You may not know. We had a little girl in our care who couldn't have milk. We didn't know until we gave it to her because no one told us that she couldn't have it. Are they afraid of the dark? Are they toilet trained? Can they take a shower by themselves? Those are all things that you kind of learn as you go. You learn with them and they learn with you.
Wow. So you talked about the goal always of foster care being reunification. I want to kind of go through that process, but I want to start with, so you get that intake phone call and there's a knock on your door and somebody's got a child. First of all, what have you done in between the phone call and the knock to prepare? And what do you do when they're there and you may not even know their name? Like, how do you respond? How do you try and, I mean, there's got to be awkwardness to that. There's got to be some unease to that. What is that process like in that moment?
So on December 20th of 2019, I was in the middle of Gordon's Food Market and I was buying a roast for Christmas and my phone rang. And I got a phone call and it was, Melissa, we have a little girl who needs a home. Are you able to provide one? It just so happened that my son had asked Santa for a little sister. And we had talked about fostering and we had talked about fostering and we had talked about fostering another one at this point. And I said, of course, bring her on. I said, how soon will you be there? And they said, we can be there in 25 minutes. And I thought, oh, it's going to take me 25 minutes to even get home. And I have nothing for a little girl, nothing. Because when you foster, you never know if you're going to get a little girl, a little boy. You don't know if they're going to be older. You don't know if they're going to be younger. You don't know if they're going to have special needs, if that's what you decide. So all I knew is I was getting a 2-year-old African-American little girl. And she was coming in 25 minutes and I was 35 minutes away from the house. So I left my roast at Gordon's. I got in the car. I looked at my husband and the boys and said, hey, guess what? We're having a visitor. We came home and I had a new set of pajamas for my son. It happened to be Batman. And I quickly made the bed with what I thought was girl colors. I had green and white, so that's what we used. I grabbed a couple teddy bears, put them on the extra bed, and we went from there. 25 minutes, the doorbell rang. Here walked in our amazing little lady. And all I did was I knelt by the door, and when she came to me, Devin, she was filthy. She was in clothes that were too big for her. She was in, she just she had a hard day and you could just tell it had been a hard day. So we just started playing. The foster care worker talked to us and kind of told us a little bit about it, but she was in and out of here in less than 10 minutes. This is her name. This is what we know about her. This is her birth date. And this was kind of her situation. We got her in, I got her comfortable. I looked at my husband and I said, I changed her clothes. I set her in front of the television with him. They started playing. I said, I'm going to Walmart. And he said, okay. I went to Walmart and quickly got everything I needed. And we brought her back, gave her a bath, got her ready to go. But again, you never know what's going to happen. We always try and keep a couple things kind of in the closet and what may happen. And kind of what this would look like, if we did get another child. We've now, she was our second ever foster placement. We had gotten the boys and they had stayed with us. She was our second call. Now we've gotten calls on top of that, and we've got a little stockpile of things, but not a lot. But this is where room resources come in fact, because I'm sure there are listeners thinking, oh my goodness, what do I do? All of a sudden, I've got this new child in my house and she needs clothes, she needs toys, she needs bedding. How do I do her hair? What does this look like? It was 5 days before Christmas. What is her Christmas going to look like? Part of fostering is building relationships and building resources. Every community has a foster closet. If you're ever looking to donate, obviously you donate to your favorite organizations, but your foster closets in your communities can always, 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 always use donations. Foster closets are ran by volunteers. You will rarely ever find them sitting in a strip mall. You will find them in the basement of someone's house. You will find them in a pole barn. You will find them in a garage. I reached out to a foster friend of mine and she said, all right, call the foster closet. I called the foster closet and they said, Melissa, come on in the next day. And it is just this giant area where there are things. I had one car seat. We needed another. She said, all right, I have a car seat. I was able to get her clothes. I was able to find books and they helped me give her a Christmas on top of, it's we're building doll houses now and getting those things kind of done, but it's gathering all those resources. Every time we get a new one, you have an opportunity to go to a foster closet. Foster closets aren't just if you foster. If you're a guardian and you take on you get a phone call because that niece or nephew is in trouble, you can reach out to them as well. They are designed to help families in all situations when it comes to guardianship, temporary custody, you look at permanency, or foster care. So they are out there. It was a resource for us because obviously we all know that children can be expensive. And when you have a little one, you have 9 months to buy things. You have the opportunity to pick a little here and there. But when you have a little one at your door, you need all of those things now.
Right.
Right now. And so it's those late night trips to Walmart. It's those calls to your family saying, hey, there's a new little one in the house. I need this. And it's a call to your local foster closet.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I'm trying to think of what I even want to ask next. So with that, so if again the goal is reunification, so let's say they're with you, I don't know, 3 months, and so you've accumulated clothes, toys, things, and they get the opportunity to go back. Do they take that stuff with them? Do you keep it? Does it go to
Yes.
the foster closet? How does that work?
So we've had a couple of different situations. We always offer that stuff back. Sometimes the parent will say, yes, I'll take it back. Sometimes they'll say no. If they say no, what I do is I always package that stuff back up and I send it right back to the foster closet because there's going to be another little girl who comes into care 25 minutes later that needs clothes. Not all of this stuff is brand new. A lot of times it's gently used. When my boys grow out of their clothes, I send them right to the foster closet. Little PSA, 90% of teens that come into foster care cannot get adequate clothing. I know we're all adults who's listening to this. When you're going through your stuff, call the foster closet, donate your stuff because, there's foster care doesn't know a size, a shape, a color, or an age. So please, I know that was kind of off tangent, but please, as you're looking to donate, don't just think foster closets takes young students, young children. They take all the way up to the age of 18. So whatever you have, socks, underwear, you name it, they need it, and go from there. So big or little. So we always kind of donate back to the foster closet. We always donate back to those resources. And we like to send the stuff with them. Sometimes we've had families that have welcomed their items back. Sometimes we have had families who have not been so welcoming of their items back. I always save the clothes that they have come to us in. Always, if they're salvageable, and I always return those back. With them, I like to make a kind of a scrapbook or a note of what they've done when they're with us. That's kind of part of what it looks like. You can choose, and sometimes the courts choose for you, how much communication you have with their parents. I have been lucky. I've always had decent communication with our foster's families. I think it's important for them to kind of know what they're doing. Some we've called a couple times a week. Some we've called every day, and some we've had quarter phone calls with. So it's completely up to them. And then I share, hey, here's what we've done today. Here's a couple pictures. We've gotten some of this. I don't want to ever make a parent feel like we're trying to say, well, here's all the stuff that we got, so we want to make sure they get back with it. And look at all these new items and look at all this. That's not what we're here to do. She's got a couple of dolls while she's in care. She's gotten a couple of this. Are you okay with it coming back to going home with her?
So in that, the question that comes up for me is how do you protect yourself in that of not just the attachment that you can obviously develop in caring for this child, but also the like, we're taking care of your kid because you can't person, and having that kind of, because I would imagine that it'd be very easy to slip into that attitude if you're not careful about it. How does that process work?
It's a practice in humility. I've got to say it, there have been times that I have been so mad with some of the things that have led children into our care. And there have been times that I just want to say, if you would have, this wouldn't have happened. That's not my space. My space is to say, to care for so and so. My job is to make sure they're taken care of. I've been lucky to have good relationships. Now, that does not mean that there's not been met with arguments. That does not mean that I have not had to say, I'm sorry, this phone call is ending. And there has not been times where I have not called our caseworker and said, I can't do this anymore. And you need to get a handle on this now, or we're going to have to look at some other options. Devin, you know me personally, you know that I'm very passionate. So sometimes it's very hard for me to kind of find that line, but this is what our family was called to do. This is what we were called to do. And every child who's walked toward and in our home, we've made a connection with. The boys were lucky enough to know their last foster family before they came to us. We have always tried to leave that door open, and say, feel free to call us if you need a weekend off. Let us kind of serve as that kind of extension of your family for that child. We have not seen that returned. All of the kiddos that we have returned to care have not contacted us, which may be a blessing. Very well could be a blessing. But that doesn't mean they don't hurt when they leave. But we know that the goal of we fostered knowing that we would be reunifying. If we did not plan on that, we would have looked at adoption from the get-go. Sometimes they'll tell you when a child walks into care that, parental rights are ending. With the boys, we were told that the minute we got them, we were looking at termination. It was almost 2 years. There were options of reunification, and every time my heart broke because we were told, this was going to be a permanent situation. This is what it was going to look like. But in the state's eyes, the goal of fostering is to reunify with the family. Even though we think it's wrong, even though we think as parents and humans, how could you do this and still get your child back?
Right.
How could you do this and still happen? There were moments up until the judge actually signed the dotted line that the boys were staying with us forever. The month before that, they were like, well, they could go home. We'd had them almost 3 years at this point. And my heart is breaking. And I'm thinking, okay, what do we do? What we did is to ensure that our children knew, that our boys knew how to make their own meals, how to do their own dishes, how to call for help, how to get ready for school, their first and last name, where they lived. So we tried to prep them with those life skills. But also by guarding our heart, knowing that at any time, we could get a phone call. I speak of our amazing little lady. I just told a story. We had not planned. Her plan was to have permanency with us. My husband and I had planned a weekend out of town. We had found her respite care. When you have a foster child, you can't just leave them with anyone like you do your kiddo. They have to be state checked, and they have to be on your foster care list. So we had found my dad was going to watch her. She was going to stay with my sister and my dad. We were halfway up to our destination. We got a call from our agency and said, hey, little lady is going home today. And I said, oh, really? She's going home today. I said, that is wonderful, because that's what we were hoping for. But so we turned around. We drove back to Howell, which was an hour from an hour from where we were. And then we drove back to Dearborn Heights because all of our stuff was here. So it's never, it's a life of love. And when you decide to do it, you have to know that going home is the goal. And I say it and I say it again. And oftentimes I have to remind myself not to let my heart get hardened.
Mhm. And that's the part that I think is so difficult for people from the outside who think, I could never do that. Again, I'm providing this safe environment. I'm taking care of these kids. I know the situation that they're going back to. And that's not always the case because people can change. But sometimes when you really feel like that's not the case, but it still is what's happening, you know, my first thought is, how do you not transfer that to the child and help them, be, I don't know if eager is the right word, but be ready to go back to a situation that you as an adult are not sure is a good situation or a safe situation, but that's what you got to do. How do you do that without that rubbing off on them that you don't think this is good?
So our story is actually very complicated. And I say it, I didn't know if we would get into it, but our boys, this isn't the first time we fostered them.
Mm,
It's the second time that I fostered them. I was living in Kentucky and got a phone call that they needed a home back in 2007. At that time, I took them into my care for all of almost a week, and the judge in Kentucky ordered them to go back home with their mother in Michigan. That was in 2006. Our hearts were broken. At that time, I was a new foster parent. I was much younger and much more naive than I was. It was brand new. My heart was broke into a million pieces.
mm,
How dare this happened? They knew this, what these children had come from. How dare they return them? What are they thinking? Of course, we heard all sorts of things. The children were from Michigan, you were in Kentucky, the children were in Kentucky at the time they were taken. So we wanted to return them to Michigan because essentially it was the state's problem and we didn't want to take it. So that's why they went back. And I was like, well, okay, that didn't help my heart any, but I said, okay, well, my life situation changed drastically. I wound up, the situation I in completely changed. I wound up moving back to Michigan. I wound up, during that time, I met Devin. When I was the director at the preschool, I was in a new relationship. I had gotten married. All of these things had happened. And then God brought the babies back into our lives. The same situation that led them to care the first time led them to care the second time. However, what we had later found out is just because they were in my care twice, they've been in the system 4 times. So that means they had been in homes 2 other times on top of times that they were placed with family, the neighbors, because things had happened, they were left alone, all of those things that kind of go through it. They themselves had been traumatized so much from being into care. Um, At that time, we had parental visits, court ordered, which means they'd go to visit with their parent. It was a supervised visit. And oftentimes, foster parents will tell you parent visits are the hardest day of the week. They are. They were the days that we saw the most amount of tears, the most amount of aggression. We saw behaviors we had never seen before, because they were scared. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't know, you know, one hand they were told you're going to be safe, and the next hand they were told, well, you're coming back home to live with me. It was hard. We got through it. There were nights that visit days had gotten to the point, and we told our caseworker they had gotten so bad that our babies weren't sleeping. They would go to school and have a horrible day. They would come home and we'd have complete meltdowns. So our visiting days actually got changed to the weekends, so it was a little easier. We still saw the meltdowns, but they were still able to kind of function. Later on, those became easier as every time we went to court, our children were older. I was honest with them as much as I could be, and as much as it was child appropriate to be. Um, this is what the court said. This is what the judge said needed to happen before these things could happen again. And the next times they would check. Because if you have a reunification plan, the judge will tell you, this is what it needs to happen. Whether the parent needs to go to rehab, the parent needs to prove that They have electricity on for 30 days. They have to be able to balance a checkbook. They have to be able to get to and from visits. They have to be able to provide items. A lot of infant and toddler visits, the parents have to be able to provide diapers and wipes and formulas and snacks. They have to be able to provide age-appropriate activities. Visits are really funny because you think that, hey, you're going to go visit a parent, and you might do it in a home, you might do it somewhere else. Sometimes it's in a park. Ours was in a library and in the lobby of DHS. So it's not a real comfy, cozy type of let's get to know each other. It was a very public visit. We never got to the point where we had unsupervised visits. All of our visits were always supervised by the caseworker or by visitation workers. But those visitation workers and those caseworkers, they were kind of hands off. They kind of sat in the back and let the parents do what they needed to do. For kiddos who have gone home, a lot of times they were placed in our care. One, like I said, the parent was sick. They just had to prove they got better. The second one was because they lost heat and power in the home. They had to be able to keep it on for 30 days with enough in their checking account and what would happen, a contingency plan. So that was a little different as well. During that time, both of those kiddos did not have visits. They had phone calls and like video chats.
Right. So I guess in my mind, especially when you're talking about kids that are a little bit older, that are aware of their surroundings, so to speak, like I can see how they could be excited about seeing mom and dad, or mom or dad, because they haven't seen them for a while, but then also have that hesitancy, depending on the situation exactly, have that fear, especially if there was abuse or neglect, and you have both ends of the spectrum. And then here you are as the foster parent. How do you help them kind of manage those waters so that, again, the goal is reunification, so that it can be a positive experience for the child ultimately?
I think it's keeping it a positive light. A lot of times with physical abuse and neglect and even emotional abuse, both parties have to go through therapy. And it's one of those things that we talked about, you see so and so to help you get over what you've been through. Mom sees so and so else to help her go through. We talked to our boys about, if they felt unsafe, to go get the visitation worker. Visitation was hard. Some foster parents leave their kiddos and let the foster care worker take them. We never did. We always drove them to the visit and sat and counted every single second until they got back out to us. Some visits were good, and they come back happy, and they come back fulfilled, and they would come back excited. Sometimes visits would not be so good because they were filled with false promises and filled with false hope. With older kiddos, with our boys, I was always very honest. And sometimes that meant kind of crushing those dreams and those words that were given to them. I'm going home next Saturday. But again, I'm really sorry. I know that this is what you were told, but the judge said that you're not going home next Saturday. And you could tell that crushed. It completely crushed the spirit. Oftentimes that anger was directed straight to me, because I was the one that said that. How dare you say that, Melissa? How dare you say that? Our foster kiddos have always had the option to call us whatever they want to do within reason. My boys, even right now, it is Big Mama and Papa Joe. It is always, most of our foster kiddos have always called me Big Mama, just because that is what the boys call me. So how dare you, Big Mama? How dare you tell me that? And it would result throwing ourselves down on the floor, screaming, crying. And that's just consoling a kiddo. There's no book that says this is easy. No one tells you the right words to do this.
Mhm.
As much support as we give our kiddos, we have cheerleaders behind us.
Mhm.
Every foster parent should have a mentor that they can turn to, should have someone that they can look into. We have great foster families, but we also have a huge resource with Facebook. There's all sorts of foster care resources on Facebook. There's lots of, I get online and at least once a week I say I had to tell my kiddo, I had to tell my kiddo that they weren't going home with mom and dad. How do you handle that? And you read those stories. It's guarding their heart, but also letting them know the possibility. It's kind of easy at the beginning because you don't know what's going to happen, and you constantly say that I don't know what's going to happen, buddy. We're just gonna have to wait and see what happens. As we got closer to termination, and home was not going to be an option. We knew that home wouldn't be an option. At this point, our boys had gotten older. Um, and we were honest with, hey, we looked at this. These were the goals that parent had to reach um, to get home. That we didn't reach the school. We didn't reach the school. And instead of saying, you know, you're going to live with us now, we said, hey, we are so lucky to be able to invite you to get to stay with us. You'll still, if you wish to have communication with mom, the judge says that's okay. The judge also said, when that terminancy is done, when parental rights ends, it is now the new parent's right to kind of set those guidelines. I could have said, you'll never have communication with your parent again. And that would have been my right as a parent.
Mhm.
But my boys already had an established relationship with their mom. They already knew who she was. They were already talking to her once or twice a week. What damage would I have done if I said, nope, you can't talk to her anymore?
Mhm.
So we took the road and said, you can still call her. You can still talk to her. We didn't invite her over for dinner. We didn't say, well, come on over. We celebrated holidays with her, Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter, Valentine's Day, all of those things. But that was our choice. You don't have to as a foster parent. It was our choice because we wanted them to be able to make those connections. Our kids knew they had a mom. You only get one mom in this world. And the Bible says you honor your mother and father. And that's what we listen to. You don't get to pick your parents. You don't get to choose them.
That is
But
such a great perspective. And again, knowing you and
right,
knowing your personality, you are always somebody who looks for the best in the worst situation. And so that doesn't surprise me at all. But again, your situation is unique in the age of the
right.
kids and the relationship that was there. So obviously every situation can be very, very different.
Yes,
Um,
always.
Now, with the time that we have remaining, I want to go back to the resources. For people that might be watching the interview, listening, and maybe their hearts just pricked for these kids that are in need, and they say, "Okay, I want to look into this." But I mean, this sounds overwhelming, and honestly, it can be
It
overwhelming.
is.
But what are some of the other things? Like you mentioned, the care closet, or I might not be saying that right, but what are some other resources, not just for the kids, but for you as the foster parent that can be available? And I know it can vary by state depending on where people are, but generally speaking.
It varies by state. It really does. If you're in Michigan, if you're in Ohio, if you're in Kentucky, those are the states that I can speak on. You've got foster care closets. You have churches all over the place that run respite days. There are days that you can drop your little one off on a Saturday or a Sunday. These are people who have already been checked by the state. They already have background checks. A lot of times they have therapists and special needs and people who will give medicine for you, and you can have an hour or two. The kids have a great time, but it's also a time for you to kind of connect with other foster parents. But
Mhm.
also, it's a time to sometimes just go get your shopping done. A lot of churches have foster care ministries where they'll help with things like backpacks, back to school, those things. Every state has a foster care camp. They have a camp where kiddos can go away for a week with other foster care kiddos. Because, we talk a lot about parents, and we talk a lot about, what resources are there for parents, but what resources are there for those kiddos? Because a lot of times they know they're different. They're not calling you mom and dad. They're having to go to visits. They're going to therapies that their friends are going to. They're having to think about reunification. And they're maybe the only one in their school. They may be the only one in their playgroup. They may be the only one in baseball. How do you explain to a baseball coach that, I'm sorry, you can't take a picture of my child and post it on Facebook because he's not my child? You need to make sure you always leave number 8 out. But those resources too. Your agency can be your best advocates. Your voice is your best advocate. If you need help, ask. If you don't know something, don't be afraid to ask. If you get overwhelmed, don't be afraid to ask. Oftentimes your agency can also find respite care. During our time, we had a very tragic event. I had to leave the state of Michigan immediately. All of my respite caregivers had to go with me. They were my sister, they were my dad, they were my aunts. All of them were going with me. So it was trying to find caregivers who can take care of your kiddo. You also kind of make those relationships through Facebook and those resources groups. You make those relationships within the community too. And don't be afraid to tell your story. But if you're looking to foster, do your research. Find that agency that believes in what you believe and believe in what that looks like. We were lucky and fortunate enough to find an agency that we were able to call. You have good workers, you have fair workers, and you have not great workers. But it's always been, I tell them what I need, and if I don't get it within a little bit, I kind of work my way up.
And having some experience with somebody from my church who works on the other side as a caseworker, I can say this too. Some of these people are the things that they go through for their families. They're wonderful. They're angelic. They're divine. To be able to do the things that they do, and they're doing it like you're doing it for one kid or two kids. They're doing it maybe for dozens.
30. Right.
And trying to manage it all. So it can be overwhelming. The whole system, as much as it's set up to try and help kids, there's so much that needs to be done.
Yes.
And that's why, I think this is such an important discussion to have and to bring to light, because there are a lot of people out there that maybe they can't take care of a kid. They're not in a financial position. They're not in an emotional, but they can help with donations. They can help with a respite situation. They can help with lots of these other things that support this process. I know in Kentucky, where I am, there are child advocates, volunteers, who their job is basically just to make sure that somebody is speaking. Okay, here's the foster parents, here's the biological parents, here's the state. Who's actually talking for the kid?
Who's talking for the kiddo?
And hey, wait a minute, this is all great, but what about this child over here? So there are all sorts of ways that people can get involved that can make a real difference. Because again, we're talking about real kids in every single state, in every county, in every community across this country, and really in all over the world. But it happens everywhere. I mean, if somebody says, oh, well, that's not an issue here, you're wrong. It is an issue.
Tonight, when we go to bed, 375 children in the state of Michigan will be placed into foster care today. 375 children will have had to say goodbye to whatever situation they would be in, and they're sleeping in new beds tonight. We are one of the lowest states. You look at states like California, who take in almost up to 1,000 kiddos a day in the system. Even when I was in Kentucky back in 2006, I think it was 100 children a night went into foster care. It's 2020, so we can imagine what that looks like now. It affects any child. We talk about the situation of health, but what happens if mom and dad are in a car accident and there's no one there to take care of that child? That child may have come from a great home, but they don't have a grandma and grandpa. They don't have an aunt and uncle. They don't have a neighbor. Guess what?
Mm-hmm.
They're in foster care now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's all over. But there's always something you can do. You can respite, you can call, or you can just be a listening ear. We get those looks sometimes because our boys don't look like us. We have had fosters of all shapes, sizes, and colors.
Mm-hmm.
Don't judge. Just just help. I've read stories. We have a friend who has 6 fosters right now, all under the age of 5. She said she was in the grocery store the other day. 4 of them are crying, and this lady looked at her and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm just trying to raise happy humans." It happens. It happens. All we can do is love one another and be kind.
Yeah, that is so true. Final thought from you in terms of the mindset and the drive to be involved in, I use the word ministry because that's my background, but maybe somebody who isn't a person of faith wouldn't consider it a ministry. They consider a service. But what would you say to somebody as we close to kind of encourage them, find your spot in being involved in helping kids?
Everyone in this everyone on this earth has something special to offer, whether it's a smile for a child or whether it's a home. Find yours that fits. If it's donating a book to a local library, if it's calling your foster agency and saying, "Hey, I want to take a class," just because you go to orientation, you're not locked in. Just because you ask the questions, "What does it take?" You're not locked in.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you get in and you foster and you don't like it anymore, because something happens, or we paused our foster license for a while so we could take care of the kiddos we had. It's okay to say, at this point, it's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
But just because you have the conversation doesn't mean you're locked into it. If you're interested, check it out. um, it's not designed for everyone, but playing basketball isn't designed for everyone. Driving fast cars isn't designed for everyone. So you find what you can do
Yeah.
to give back. We drop the bucket, we drop the coin in the red bucket around Christmas time to give back. You call your foster agency to see what they need. You get with your friends as you're cleaning out their garage and realize you have old bikes. Call your foster closet, give them away. Find what works for you, and just remember, be kind.
Absolutely. And again, I want to throw in as we close, and first of all, thank you for sharing all this. That again, the goal is always in foster care. I mean, if you're going through an adoption agency,
Adoption,
that's a different thing. But in foster care, the goal is always reunification. And
reunification.
sometimes that is a heart-wrenching process because it doesn't matter if the kid is with you for 3 days or 3 years. You're taking them in a vulnerable time, and you are going to just pour love into them. It's going to hurt to hand them back to a situation that something had to have gone wrong or they wouldn't have come out, but that's always the goal. And so you always have to keep in mind not what's best for me. No, I'm the
For them.
vessel, I'm the tool, I'm the person here to help with what's best for the child.
Yep.
And that's a hard, you said it so perfectly earlier, selfless. It's a hard thing to be that selfless, because you don't want to be. You don't want to
We
be.
don't want to be.
Uh, but,
But if we wanted this to be a permanent thing, we would have looked into adoption. We
right.
were lucky. Again, ending note, our goal was not to keep our boys as long as we have. We were blessed, and God said, "All right, these kids need a home. You can provide them for it." So we did. Um, but the goal is always to go home. And as long as I keep that in my mind, and sometimes I have to look at them and say, "Good morning, Devin. I'm glad you're here." In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, Melissa, he's going to go home, because that's the goal of this.
Right.
The goal of joining Weight Watchers is to lose weight. The goal of going to school is to learn something. The goal of foster care is to help a family who cannot provide for their child right now,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and to get them back home with mom and
And
dad.
and there is absolutely nothing wrong with people that go through an adoption agency and they want a
Absolutely not.
child. And there's nothing wrong with being involved in this process and being able to get to that place where you get to be the forever home. But mindset is so important because, again, these kids, they didn't ask for this. They didn't do anything wrong. And they deserve, oh my gosh, I'm going to start crying. They deserve people around them and in their lives who are going to always put their best interest first. Kids deserve that.
Absolutely.
They do. So, wow. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much for sharing. It's good to see you. Good to
It's
talk
good to
to
see
you
you.
and hear this story. This was all just like very beginning, starting when I left Michigan. So it's so great to hear more. And to you and your husband, bless you. Thank you. People who are out there who are foster parents or involved in the system in some way, thank you. Those that are even thinking about ways to be involved, thank you. And just I would say it like this, the ministry side of me, be led in what you do. And if this isn't for you, that's fine. But there is a way out there that you can still cleaning out your garage, getting rid of old clothes, whatever it might be, make an incredible difference in a moment of vulnerability and weakness in the life of a kid. We can all do that. We can all do that. Melissa, thank you so much. Appreciate you, love you, and just glad to have you with me. And everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you'll come back and join us for the next episode very soon. Bye.
Thank you, Devin. Bye, guys.